Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and this Friday we're going to be talking with U.S. House candidate, gubernatorial, or U.S. House candidate, currently in the United States House, running for governor. I'm confused. Our last guest was running for the House after running for governor, so I don't know. It's all super confusing. It's Kelly Armstrong, ladies and gentlemen. He's on the show. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you guys?
Doing good. You know, the first thing I wanted to ask you about is you kind of came out swinging this week from your campaign. You got an ad that's running. You got a website that's running. Tale Tammy, and you're accusing her of saying some things that aren't true and things like that. I was interested in the decision to go negative or to go, obviously after Tammy like that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I've talked to you guys before. I've ran I've ran campaigns, in one way, shape, or form since 2012. But I mean, the reality is we know the campaign team. We know what we're up against. We know how this all works. And we're coming out and we're going to fight for being the governor of North Dakota. And we're going to play we're going to play under the rules as they are, not the rules as they wish they were. The campaign team has never not gone scorched earth negative in any race they've ever ran. We know it. There was a push-pull this weekend, and we're going to go out. We still got our positive stuff out. We're going out talking to as many people. We've agreed to every debate. We're willing to do that, but we're going to run a campaign to go win and be governor, and this is part of that strategy.
Kelly, I've talked to some folks who suggest that because you're the first one to throw a punch, that means that you're nervous. What would you say to those folks?
I'm in a campaign, Chad. I'm always nervous. I've been nervous in every campaign I've ever ran. I mean, if you're not running nervous and if you're not doing everything you can to win, then you're not doing it right. I've spent a lot of time in courtrooms. I've spent a lot of time on baseball fields. When you're in a competitive endeavor, you're always going. But this is, we like where we're at. We like where we're at right now. We like the message we have for North Dakota. We like the authenticity of our campaign. We like the accessibility of our campaign, and we're going to continue to do that all the way through June 11th and then November.
Do you feel like, obviously you talk about when you're saying about, you know who you're up against. There's never been a campaign where they haven't gone scorched earth. That's, really Tammy's using Doug Burgum's same political team. I mean, it's the same personnel. And I think that's right. When we look back to his 2016 campaign, we look at his less so his 2020 campaign, which wasn't, terribly competitive, but we look at their approach, I think that's right.
10,000 mailers in Republican primary voters' mailboxes in every election since 2016. Yeah, we know exactly what we're dealing with. We know who we're dealing with, and we're going to continue to move forward.
So saying that critically of them, I mean, do two wrongs make a right? I mean, if it's wrong when they do it, I don't know if maybe that's the argument you're making, but I mean, if it's wrong,
I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I'm saying it's the nature of what the campaign is. I've never run a negative ad. Since 2012, I've never done it. I've always had the luxury and the approach of doing that. But we're going to go out, and I just got to be honest. The one thing I hate in politics is I just despise it. And I see it all the time out here is inauthenticity, trying to create a character, trying to do all of these different issues. And, so we're going to have some fun with it. We got a lot of positive messages. We feel like we've made those rounds in every election, every 2 years. We're going to keep doing it.
Hey, Kelly, I was at Grace Link's funeral this week, 105 years old. And during Heidi Heitkamp's eulogy of Grace, she talked about how important it was that Grace and Governor Link were farmers. They were people of their communities and that type of thing. And I got to tell you, it sort of triggered in my mind the comment that was made from the current governor that you would not make a good governor because you're not the CEO of a large company. Tell me a little bit about when you heard that. What were you thinking? Because there's not a lot of CEOs of companies, which sort of limits the pool of governors. Tell me what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Governor Burgum chose Tammy to be his lieutenant governor. I understand all of those different things, but I do think that narrows the pool of people who can be governor. And more importantly, that's not what North Dakota is. It's not. North Dakota's family farms, small businesses, very few large businesses in North Dakota. I know a ton of farmers who would do a good job as governor. I know a ton of small business owners who would do a good job as governor. Part of being in North Dakota is doing those things, being a volunteer firefighter, helping raise money for a new baseball field, trying to get a new junior high built, doing all those things in your community. Those are the most successful people. And it doesn't matter if it's Fargo or Grand Forks or Mott or Hettinger or any one of the communities in between. You know, we were just in Elgin looking at their hospital a couple of weeks ago. That thing is a unicorn in rural America, not just in North Dakota. And understanding those dynamics and being able to maintain and cultivate those relationships is absolutely essential to being successful in the governor's office.
I think Governor Burgum would. I mean, if he was a part of this conversation, I think his rebuttal might be Ed Schaefer was an executive. John Hoven was a banker, you know, certainly business person, executive. Jack Dalrymple, although his family has very strong roots in agriculture. Dakota Farms. I mean, Jack Dalrymple, very, very wealthy man. And then obviously himself, a CEO, he would say, you know, North Dakota has a long history of electing business leaders and executives to the governor's position.
But my response to that would be, okay, great. I ran a family farm. I ran a sports bar in Dickinson, North Dakota. I was vice president of my dad's oil company, which is a small business and employees wise, but is nowhere near a small business. I mean, in the scheme of what we do with things. And I ran my law firm, which is a small business and a service under business. I have a ton of executive experience. I was a state party chair of the North Dakota Republican Party for 3 years. Executive experience doesn't mean large scale corporate executive experience. Executive experience in North Dakota is exactly all of those things. And I'm proud of the record I had prior to getting in government and I'm proud of the record I've had in government. But I still say, I mean, you're going to do massive property tax reform. You're going to figure out a way to move these things forward. You're going to figure out a way to bring more cops and teachers and nurses to communities that need it. You better have relationships, and you better have relationships with the legislature. You better have relationships with the local county officials, and you better have relationships with the constituents who you're asking to buy into what you're selling.
Kelly, can you talk about how you're approaching the GOP state convention? I think Miller has said that she is not, I don't know if she's not attending or just not seeking the endorsement. Are you attending? Are you seeking the endorsement? Are you all in for that process?
Attending, seeking the endorsement, will be there, have been to as many of the district conventions as we could. Obviously, we still have a day job out here that we work really hard to do, but traveled the entire, I think like 40,000 miles or 4,000 miles in that span, trying to get from one place to the other. Obviously, state party chair, very, very, very proud of the convention process as we do it. Wish everybody would take the opportunity to go talk to the grassroots. But yeah, we're going to be there and we're excited about it.
When you referenced a messaging poll that Tammy had run, and I published it in my column, or at least as many questions of it as I could get my hands on. And some of the things in there, and to be clear, I haven't seen Miller use these in like an ad or anything yet, but I do remember, there was an interview Governor Burgum did on KFYR, and he was kind of referring to you as lawyer Armstrong. And when I first heard that, it struck me as odd. And then along comes this messaging poll, and then all of a sudden there's all these questions about how you're a lawyer. And, you obviously, if we've done interviews in the past when we've talked about policy, you've made a lot of references to your career in criminal justice, working as a defense attorney. And, they point out, he represented a client who, was accused of and apparently convicted, according to them. I don't know this case, but, was apparently convicted of spousal abuse. Another one that was convicted of child abuse. And they're saying, you chose to represent these people. Now, again, Miller hasn't essentially put these in an ad or anything yet, but obviously these are the sorts of messages she's contemplating. Can you respond to some of that?
Yeah, 61 years ago on Tuesday, Gideon versus Wainwright came out. Turns out everybody, whether you can afford it or not, is allowed a defense. I've been fighting for people's civil liberties, sometimes in a really unpopular venue. I'm proud of the work I did as a criminal defense attorney. I mean, I represented private clients. I did court-appointed work. We're going to continue to go through that, but it also really has shaped the way in which I do things. And I think you can ask a lot of people in North Dakota and DC. You want to talk about police reform. You want to talk about protecting law enforcement. You want to talk about criminal justice reform. This stuff has to work at 2 a.m. on the side of the road, not in a congressional hearing. And if we're going to, it's a campaign, Rob. It's politics. Things are going to be said, whatever. But if they think I'm going to back away from my time as a criminal defense attorney, they don't know me very well.
Kelly, on Wednesday, we had the executive director of North Dakota Legal Services on talking about the really dramatic issues they have in terms of staffing up their office. I think he mentioned they're down 30% of their staff. They're having a tough time keeping up with the workload. He went to the legislature and basically made the case that there needs to be more funding. They're not getting what they've asked. With your background, I mean, you obviously understand based on your answer how important this is. As governor, how would you approach this to make sure that North Dakota Legal Services is funded and has the attorneys they need to basically provide the services that you just talked about?
By the way, you know who else agrees with that? Judges, prosecutors, law enforcement. Anybody who understands the administration of justice and how you have to work through this and how you have to do it. We saw all of this during the oil boom in Western North Dakota. Also, one of the things I think people don't always recognize is in order to do this job well in North Dakota and in order to provide public defense, you need private contract attorneys. That's how I did most of my public defense, which means you need lawyers who are making a living on the ground doing this work that are actually understand this work. But we have to figure out a better way to do it. The stressors in Western North Dakota have existed since we first started in the legislature, and we plus some of it up. But if you rely overly on contract attorneys, it's more expensive, but you're also going to have to raise the rate for contract attorneys. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to take those cases because most of them take it to help out the system. They're being paid at a significantly discounted rate than they do in private practice. We're dealing with it right now with federal public defenders out in DC and how you figure out in which you make the mechanics of the criminal justice system work. It has to work all the way around, and we have to figure out a way to get them better funding. And I think the legislative committee, I didn't see the whole thing, but I saw some clips, Chad. I think they recognized it as well. And that's from people who maybe traditionally 10 years ago wouldn't have. So I think we're getting the message across. It's part of making sure criminal justice works in a meaningful and appropriate way.
In fact, there were some lawmakers during that hearing or that committee meeting that apologized, or one of them did anyway, apologized and said, we haven't been doing what we should be doing. Back to your ad. One of the sources you cite was this podcast, but also you cited an artificial intelligence website that's been banned from Twitter for promoting fake news.
Yeah, we're going to make sure we do a better job with that. I mean, we could have cited Jim Shaw. We could have done a lot of different things. There's a ton of quotes out there. We just wanted to make sure that we were bringing it. But I mean, the quotes are there. I mean, it's there, and we're working forward. And I mean, we're not going to do everything perfectly. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to run hard. We should have done dealt with that, but we know it. We move forward, and it's the quote exists, so we're good with it.
Admittedly, it was a little personal for me because that website has stolen my content, and regurgitated it as their own. So I mean, that's something that. Yeah,
and I agree, and it's that, but the quote's legit, and we're okay. I mean, the thing is, sure. when you're striving for authenticity, I should be honest with you guys as well too.
Where do you see this campaign going? I mean, right now, I think the focus is on, the convention that's coming up on April 5th. But as we come into the stretch between April and the June 11th primary, what do you expect to be the topics in this campaign? I mean, what are you expecting to be talking about?
I mean, we're going out listening to people. We're going to talk about the things they want, right? We're going to be very clear. We're going to have radical transparency in the Armstrong administration. We're going to be as accessible as any governor that's ever been. I've already changed just by talking to North Dakota voters. I think you guys know this. Property tax probably going to make the ballot. We'll figure out what that all looks like. If that passes, the whole thing is really, really problematic, from cost share for water projects to school funding in communities, all of that. But if it doesn't, we better get a handle on what that looks like moving forward. I mean, we have to get a handle on real reform. Nobody cares about the transparency on the top part of your property tax statement. They care about the number on the bottom. And we have done this in a way, and we've tried to do these things, social service mills, all of those different issues. So I think the local issues that the border is a huge issue. I mean, we hear about everywhere. It's tough because we work on that on a daily basis out in DC. But we're calling as much attention to the northern border as we can right now. And then figuring out how we continue to grow our workforce, how we continue to create opportunities for high school seniors graduating in North Dakota so they get to come home, build a life, do all of those things. Daycare, healthcare, schools, all of the things that people really, really care about in their day-to-day lives are what we're hearing on the campaign trail. And it's fun to talk about that policy.
Kelly, on taxes, just really quick, you were in the legislature. It seems like the legislature has been trying to wrap their arms around property tax forever. Last session, there's sort of this conflict between, do we do income taxes or property taxes, because the state doesn't levy property taxes, so therefore we should do income taxes. Tammy Miller has said her priority is to finish the job on income taxes. I think you said you're open to the idea of eliminating income taxes as well. But so how would you approach that, sort of the income taxes versus property tax conversation? And you mentioned you're not hearing about, well, you said you're hearing about property taxes. Does that mean you're not hearing about income taxes?
Not once. I don't think it's come up one single time in the last 2 months of campaigning. How do you approach this, Chad? You put property taxes in all bold, all caps on the top of the page. And you deal with, if you're talking about tax relief, you make sure you're figuring out that and functioning with that. Before, I'm not opposed to getting rid of income tax. I'm not opposed to getting rid of any tax. But if that funding source is what keeps you from being delivering real property tax reform, then I think I think it's a bad policy decision. I think it's bad politics. And so that's how you approach it. And you start bringing in more people and different people, and going out and meeting with people, small community school boards, large community school boards, county commissions, park boards, all of these, because people's law enforcement, they still want.
Okay, sorry about that. I had to pause the recording for a minute. We had a little bit of a technical glitch with the congressman's connection, but we got him back. And Kelly, you were delivering an answer about property taxes, and it kind of got glitched out. But let me reset that question a little bit. Let's say we get to November and the property tax measure fails, but we now have Kelly Armstrong has been elected governor. What does you referenced real property tax reform? What does that look like from the state level? Because you were in the legislature for multiple terms in the state Senate. Tammy Miller, frankly, is she's been part of the Burgum administration. She's been lieutenant governor for a year, but part of Burgum's staff before that. The public is clearly not satisfied with property taxes. In your mind, how do you earn back the trust of the public that the state can really do something that's going to satisfy them on this?
Well, I think, first of all, by not just making it about legislators, cabinet officials, and executive branch officials, we got to start bringing in everybody. And you guys know this. A small town school board or a small community school board is significantly different than Fargo, Bismarck, Minot, all of those things. But, we've done a lot of different things, and we've always hesitated. We've done a lot of carrots, a lot less, metrics or the stick side of it. And we're going to have to start talking about some of those things. Caps have been on the table before. We have to, but that's what I'm talking about. If you're going to have those conversations, you better have them on the front end, because you need the buy-in of all these communities on the back end. You have to have it. Otherwise, there's none of this stuff will be successful. So you have to, and it's important, because even if the property tax measure doesn't get on the ballot or fails, we have a legacy fund, we have all of these excess funds, and people see all of these things, And then they look at their property tax statement and they get really, really frustrated. And I understand why. So, I mean, this fight, and I mean, this conversation doesn't end until the state figures out a way to, like you said, actually deliver meaningful reform.
Yeah, Kelly, switching to your day job a little bit, you guys are trying again to keep the government open. So 2 questions. There was some budget stuff that was passed a few weeks ago that you voted against. Can you talk about why you voted no on that? And then what does it look like moving forward?
I mean, this one's really easy. That one's easy for me. In the omnibus, I mean, I hate this process. I think everybody hates this process. But I don't die on a lot of hills out here. A couple I die on are you cannot send somebody to prison without a jury trial, and you cannot make people retroactive felons for something they purchased legally. And I won't vote for a bill that funds the ATF until the pistol brace ban is retroactively, at least the part of the pistol brace ban is gone. And ATF funding was in the last bill, and that's the problem with omnibuses and minibuses is, you know, there's certain things you just have to draw a line on, and I don't draw a lot of them, but that's one I draw on, Chad.
And what's going to happen tonight? You have to pass some stuff tonight in order to keep the government open.
Yeah, I mean, and this is another one we just finished. I mean, and when I say finished, it's over 1,000-page bill. We got it released 24 hours ago. We're still going through it. There's things we like in there. Obviously, there's military pay raise. There's a ton of terrible stuff in there as well. And so we're still trying to figure out where we're at. And I mean, I was overly critical of Speaker Pelosi for doing this exact thing. I'm overly critical of Mike Johnson for doing the same thing as well.
Do you, I saw you recently in the national media talking about the impeachment situation, saying you guys don't have enough votes to get it done. Can you give us an update where that's at?
Yeah, I mean, outside of everything else right now, we have a 2-vote majority, and I know there are at least, I would say 18 to be fair. I mean, I'm not part of the whip count, but I have a pretty good idea of how our conference looks that are not interested in voting for that. So, I mean, the investigation is going to continue. I want the Her tapes. I want the audio. We had the hearing last week. Eventually, Chairman Comer and Chairman Jordan are going to have to decide how much information and how much they're going to keep fighting with DOJ to get what they want versus wrapping this up and doing a report. And after the report is done, then the House conference will have to figure out where they're going.
Well, Kelly, talk to me about how you. Oh, Rob, did you want something?
No, go right ahead.
So I'm really curious on how you're balancing these two really big things you have going on. I mean, you need to continue to represent North Dakota and Washington while running this sprint of a campaign to be governor. How are you balancing these two things? Because, I mean, obviously you're in Washington right now based on what we're seeing behind you. But you've got this stuff going. How are you balancing these two things?
Well, I mean, I was going to have a tough primary if I stayed in the House too, right, Chad? I mean, we draw that. It's the same district. It's the same fights. It's the federal regulatory regime, but I don't miss my hearings. I mean, if I'm usually not in a hearing, it's because I'm in another hearing or running up to meet with constituents. We can't quit our day job in order to run for the next job. So you have a really good team. You trust them. You're as accessible to everybody. I mean, we can still do this right now, right? Even though I'm in DC, and I'll sleep June 12th.
Kelly, thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
All right, just finished up with a very energetic Kelly Armstrong. And I really liked your last question, Chad, because I wished I had thought to ask him that, because it is really interesting. I mean, that commute, the amount of hours he must be spending in a plane back and forth between North Dakota and Washington, D.C., keeping track of all these hearings while simultaneously running for governor. And against a candidate, by the way, who's the lieutenant governor, who doesn't really have much. I mean, let's face it, the lieutenant governor.
It's not specific to Tammy Miller. The lieutenant governor generally doesn't have much to do.
This isn't me slamming Tammy Miller. The lieutenant governor doesn't really have a lot of official duties to do, and her boss, Doug Burgum, I'm sure is happy to clear her schedule for her so she can run for governor. And if Kelly started missing committee hearings in Washington D.C., you can bet that the Miller campaign would make issues out of that. So,
well, and he can't miss stuff because there's a 2-vote majority.
Right. Yeah, that's the
he
other
starts
thing.
not showing up for stuff, and the Republican majority doesn't get stuff done.
Yeah. So that is a very interesting dynamic. I thought his questions about the ad and going after Tammy. I go back and forth on whether or not it was smart to go negative first. Because he could say all the stuff about, the Burgum campaign team and how negative they've been in the past, and it's all true. And the thing is that's an explanation that works for you and I because we understand it. I wonder what the public perception is.
Yeah, I don't know what the public perception is, but I think the other thing here is just the 2016 race is just so prevalent in the strategy here, right? I mean, we all heard the stories back in 2016. Burgum's down 50 points. He runs these big ads, spends a bunch of money. Wayne doesn't punch back, and he gets demolished on election day. If I'm Kelly Armstrong, I'm making damn sure that doesn't happen again. And I guess the determination is, when do you throw the first punch? Earlier than I expected, but I would want to be the one who's throwing the first punch. And I mean, we don't know what's going to happen here in terms of Miller funding. I mean, Burgum could get the Dakota Leadership PAC up running and going and put $4 million in that campaign and just be blistering anti-Kelly stuff. So I think he had to get the first punch. You never know the timing if the timing is right.
Well, and it makes me wonder too, and I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but the thing is, you can't just push a button and launch an ad. Like if you want to get it on television screens or your stream, anywhere else, you have to book this stuff. And a lot of times there's only so much space available. So, I mean, that could be it too, where it's like, we need to get our stuff in first, not just so that we're talking first, but also, there's kind of a land rush too, where they're trying to elbow each other out of space. I mean, every broadcast minute that Kelly's eating up is a minute that Tammy Miller can't use.
Although there are rules on equal access.
That's
so
true.
if Kelly would buy, $200,000 worth of TV.
But that's only on traditional broadcast.
Right.
That's
absolutely right.
We're in a different era now with streaming and everything.
Did I just age myself?
You did.
Rob?
You are so old. Yeah. Us hip kids over here know all about. I only know this because when I'm trying to watch Shogun on Hulu, I'm getting campaign ads.
Well, and it is such a, when I've seen polling, I mean, people do get their TV so much differently. And I've been tracking the two buys from the two different campaigns. It is amazing the different strategies. I mean, Kelly is much more aggressive on streaming and digital and that kind of stuff. And Tammy's a little more traditional at this point.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see if that makes a difference. I don't, it's hard to quantify, but I would think that streaming and stuff would be a lot easier for like targeting.
Absolutely.
Unless the demographic you're targeting is not there, right? I mean, older.
But you can do it now, Rob, where I can target Rob Port streaming.
Yeah.
It's like direct mail.
Right. But what I'm saying is are there enough people from the demographic that you're trying to get out?
Sure.
That are streaming? I mean, older people vote. I mean, that's still a true thing today. They may not be as prevalent on streaming. Although streaming's been around for a while. It's not like it's new technology. So
yeah, I still think that with such a small in the grand scheme of political campaigns universe of 150, 125,000 voters in a primary, at some point you can only spend so much. I mean, there's just not that many people to target. So interesting. Again, we'll know probably on primary night if it was the right strategy or not, maybe before that.
Well, yeah.
But I think, I get and agree with their strategy of punching first.
So you think it was a good decision to drop that ad?
I do.
I do.
I don't love the ad.
In the morning, and none of these ads are
right.
are good to love. I mean, I think when we talk, I always tell people I'm talking about this. Listen, I'm separating how I feel as a citizen about these things from my obligation to analyze these things and whether or not they're going to work.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't love the ad. I thought it was a little over the top.
He owned the AI stuff though, didn't he?
He did. Yeah. And I mean, he was right. I mean, the content was right. Yeah, because the AI stole it from other sources. You should have just cited those sources, but whatever. I think he owned it. It was a mistake. I don't think they're going to do that again. But And I'm probably more, I don't know, the average member of the public is probably not reading the fine print in the ad.
I didn't know who that organization was.
Yeah, I only did because, I mean, when I recognized it immediately, well, I shouldn't say that. When I clicked over it, I was like, BNN. And then I knew about it before because it was like, oh yeah, those are the guys where I've seen my content popping up on there. Like, what is this? In fact, had literally emailed my editors about it like a few weeks ago. Like, you guys see this? Like, we should be keeping an eye on this because
these are the SOBs that stole my stuff.
They're stealing. Well, not just me. I mean, I think the article that was regurgitated there was like a Jim Shaw piece.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's my impression anyway. So yeah, I don't know. In the morning, I convinced myself that punching first is a good idea, and then in the afternoons, I start thinking it's not such a good idea. So I'm of two minds of this. I just don't know. But I mean,
what's the old saying about people who sit on a fence? Like, I don't know.
I don't know. There's probably
you're a pundit.
There's probably yeah. I'm not very good at the hot takes thing though. I never really have been. I don't know. I mean, time will tell. Time will tell. It's a decision he made, and that's the position he's in. He's got to make a choice. He's got to push one button or the other button. He pushed this one, and it's game on. I am wondering what the timeline is for her firing back, and immediately kind of. I think there's going to be a little while where they want to play the martyr for a bit, and then they'll fire back.
But do you think the average voter is listening to the back and forth on this stuff? They're just seeing the ads.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So one thing, if we could go back in time, I wish I would ask Kelly about Lieutenant Governor. I mean, he's got to make a decision before the convention that is just a few short weeks away, correct?
I don't think he does. I don't think Doug didn't. Doug didn't have a running mate at the convention.
Well, if he's the endorsement, I mean, coming out of the convention, in order to file the paperwork, and the filing deadline is right after the convention, you can't collect signatures without a running mate on the thing, and if he gets the nomination, he has to have a lieutenant. It's all in the same paperwork. Are you Googling right now?
I am.
Rob,
Doug
I'm consistently...
Well, I had to check, and I just Googled, and now I'm pulling up my own article on this from April 2016.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be done before the filing deadline. Doesn't necessarily have to be done before
the convention. April 7th, 2016, and so that would have been before the filing deadline. So yeah,
I mean, I think the filing deadline is April 8th this year.
I wonder who. So, I wonder what the strategy is. I mean, because Miller. I mean, Miller's going to have
Miller
to pick
will too.
So, I wonder what the strategy is going to be of who they would choose. I don't know. This is not something I've even contemplated at all. That's me being.
But it's going to be interesting in 2 weeks to sort of see. I mean, I assume Kelly's going to look for a woman in the eastern part of the state. I, for the life of me, can't come up with many good options, and I have no idea where Tammy Miller is going to go. I would assume somebody from western North Dakota to balance out things, but might also just be anybody who can bring votes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So. Anyway, that'll be an interesting dynamic. Although once again, does the average public care who the lieutenant governor is?
No, but you and I will.
You and I will. And it'll give us something fun to talk about. I suppose the other thing to talk about, I had a big story this week that I worked on literally for over 3 months, and mostly because I did more than a couple dozen interviews with people who left this church, New Song Church in Bismarck. And I also wanted to be really careful because it's not in me to criticize how people worship. Like, that's such a personal thing. We have freedom of religion in this country, and I believe that. I don't necessarily like everything that a given church may preach, but, that's your personal thing. But it's hard to ignore the degree of impact that evangelical Christian churches are having on Republican politics right now. There was one of the things that influenced my writing of it. There was a book out by Tim Alberta. He is a well-known, nationally known political reporter. He's worked for organizations like Politico, The Atlantic, but also is a Christian himself. And in fact, his father was the pastor of one of the largest evangelical churches in Michigan. So, I mean, this is an environment that he grew up in. And his book, it's called The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, is illuminating. in terms of like just visiting churches where every Sunday is a Trump rally, where, you know, they have people coming in and promoting conspiracy theories about the 2020 election and COVID vaccines and everything else. You know, the degree to which churches have been. And so when I started hearing about this new song, Church, and it first got on my radar because, you know, in District 30, where, you know, you had one side, you know, we have another one of these clashes between incumbent sort of moderate Republicans and, you know, these new populist challengers. You know, the challengers, one of whom, Justice Amundsen, is also the district chair, wanted to hold their district convention at New Song Church. And then you start looking into it, and Kevin Kramer's got ties. The pastor of the church has been in ads for Kevin Kramer's, you know, Senate campaign. And then you start looking, the church radio station has been turned over to Turning Point USA. You tune in, and there's all sorts of right-wing talk on this radio. I mean, you tune in, and the pastor himself is cutting ads for Mike Lindell. He's got a My Pillow code. That's weird to me.
It's not only weird, I read your article and I thought you did a fantastic job. And I think it's something that's important. You know, I didn't read it as you judging the way anybody worships. I mean, this is a political movement going on in this country that is now in North Dakota. You've got an event, a Turning Point event that's taking place at New Song Church that Drew Wrigley's speaking at, that Kevin Kramer's speaking at, that a bunch of legislators are speaking at, that the state auditor Josh Gallion is speaking at. And then you start reading those interviews that you did where basically people said, I left the church because I went and it was like a political speech. Rob, my biggest concern is, why are these folks not paying taxes?
Yeah.
If I give money to a political candidate that's not tax deductible, but somebody gives a contribution to this church, it's tax deductible, they don't pay property taxes. And if this Pastor Chaffee is basically telling people who are looking I mean, he's in a position of power that if you don't vote for Kevin Kramer, if you don't vote for Donald Trump, you're going to hell.
I don't know if that's explicitly, but I mean, he certainly
of course not. But you're sinning.
The way it was characterized to me by some of the people I talked to, and by the way, most of them didn't want to talk on the record, but about a half dozen did. And you know what they had to tell me was very representative of the more than 24 people I spoke with overall. You know, the thing they told me is basically, this is the way you vote if you want to be a good Christian. You know, and that's even separate, because we're not even talking about issues. Like, it's one thing for the Catholic Church to be like, support pro-life, support. I mean, that's issue advocacy, and
right.
That is central. I mean, I understand that. That is central to them. Agree with them or disagree with them. That is central to their faith. This is different. This is, you know, vote for this specific candidate. And by the way, we're gonna hold partisan political events at the church. And I mean, it really worries me. And then just the number, you know, one of the things that also caught my eye is there's a Facebook group in Bismarck, Mandan. I think it's Bismarck People Reporting the News or something.
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
Very popular. One of these very popular community forums where people are posting about new restaurants coming to town, or complaining about potholes, or all the different things that people do,
or how people park,
Yeah, that's always a fun one, right? When people like outing each other for how they park and taking pictures. Yeah, we could do a whole show about how I feel about that sort of thing. But they had a post, somebody on there, and they posted anonymously, and was just like, listen, I'm going to New Song, and it's become so extreme, you know, and I'm just looking for a different church. 400 comments. And a lot of them, people saying, you know, I went there too and I left. You know, you have the pastor's daughter, who's also apparently a staffer, you know, for Turning Point. And she's on, you know, just very crude, very confrontational, you know, comments on social media. You know, the pastor's posting pictures of himself going to the premiere of a political movie. It's a comedy, but it's kind of a send up of the transgendered athletes in sports. It's called Lady Ballers. You know, he's like posting pictures of himself at like the film premiere on the church website. And people are just like, you know, why are you doing this here? Why? I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me because I'm an outsider to the Christian. I'm not a Christian. I mean, my personal faith, and maybe people are going to hold that against me and think that I'm just out I would like to hope that my record on religious liberty, I've never been the sort of atheist who goes fainting in the bushes when I see a nativity scene. My argument for religious liberty is, of course, a nativity scene should be on public property as long as we're allowing other sorts of religious displays. I say invite all the religions in. It's a part of us. It's a part of our society. So I'm not an exclusive person. I'm not a judgmental person on this. But I look at the sorts of things that are happening, and I'm worried because the things that they're promoting, I'm worried are hateful and extreme and in some ways un-American.
Rob, I do consider myself a Christian, although sort of a Easter and Christmas Christian are the only 2 days I go to church. But if I started going to church, and the only time religion comes up at the church I attend, which is a Lutheran church, and again, I want to make it clear, not very often attend, is praying for our leaders, regardless of what party, regardless of whatever, to make good judgment and to be safe. If I started going to a church and they started, even if they're preaching from the left, that Joe Biden is the right person, again, policies are different. I mean, I think that there's religion where, like you said, the Catholic movement with pro-life. I also think there's religions that love everyone, make sure everybody gets treated the same, LGBTQ plus sort of advocacy.
Feed the poor, things
yeah.
like that.
When you start, I feel like feeding the poor is sort of should cross-pollinate all Christian religions, but that might be naive
and maybe
days.
just humanity. I
don't overall. Know. Yeah. But I think it does cross a line when you start talking about specific candidates and quite frankly, the Turning Points USA, Turning Points, right?
Turning Point.
Yeah, is a frightening organization. I mean, when you start thinking about Charlie Kirk and hanging out with Nazis and saying he wouldn't get on a plane where a black guy was the pilot, it's a little nerve-wracking. It's my understanding they're housed at the New Song Church, their offices, but I don't know that for sure. And there seems to be sort of this youth movement going about, and this event they're having down there, which is youth leadership that they claim is not partisan, but I mean, it's sponsored by people like the Young Republicans.
It's sponsored by Rick Becker's congressional campaign. Yeah. Everybody speaking there is a Republican.
Yeah, so it might not be political, but it certainly is partisan.
I think when a U.S. senator and an attorney general are your headliners, it's political.
I thought it was like both Wrigley and Kramer were a little dismissive of this in the article that you wrote. I mean, I think for Drew to say, hey, I don't know, it was a young leaders sort of rally, and I think Drew probably knows more about this group than he's letting on.
Yeah, well, it's very the overall trend, I think, is troubling to me. And one thing that, I mean, I look at the degree to which we're trying to rebuild trust in our institutions. And a lot of times when we talk about that, we're talking about government, or we're talking about the news media, or, or higher education or academia. I think one area where, it worries me as well is churches. Churches are an institution. They're one of the pillars of our society, even though I personally don't attend. They're important centers for community and fellowship, and to see them, I guess what I consider to be sort of corrupted or bent towards a partisan political end troubles me in the same way that it troubles me when, the news media. I've written a lot about the Dakota Access Pipeline protests and the degree to which the national news media came here and provided reporting that was fundamentally one-sided and unfair. When stuff like that happens, it erodes trust in the national news. Or when they promote, the Steele dossier and some of the more outlandish things about Donald Trump and Russia, it undermined their ability to credibly report actual problems with Donald Trump. And so, when I see the churches doing this, it's like you are undermining your role in our society. You're undermining the trust that we have. And even though, again, I am not personally Christian, that hurts our whole society.
Well, and it can be dangerous, right? I mean, if they're preaching that somehow a vaccination is terrible and it's going to kill you and it's the government trying to indoctrinate you, and it's vast, like big groups of people, that can be scary. That can be, and maybe the COVID vaccine, because everything's so damn political these days. But those kind of things, when they're preaching things that can be dangerous to the rest of society, make me nervous. But overall, I mean, we do have this blurring between church and state going on right now, partisan political activity and state. Or I don't think campaigns and doing official business on behalf of your constituents should be the same thing. There's lots of blurring going on. And again, I think people using their religion to determine their values, I mean, I think that's an important piece, right, of how you act in public service.
Yeah, well, some of the blurring that you're talking about is also, I think, the blurring between sort of entertainment and serious. I think there's a lot of Republicans out there who look at the more outlandish things that somebody like a Charlie Kirk says, or a Donald Trump says, or what have you, and they just kind of shrug their shoulders, and it's like, well, it's like Rush Limbaugh on a rant. Like, it's entertaining, but nobody's really taking it seriously. Except the problem is there comes a point at which, no, they are taking it seriously. It's not entertainment. When Charlie Kirk says, I question whether or not that black person has the credentials to fly the airplane I'm in, which is, I mean, look up the quote. That's what he said. I'm not making that up. And by the way, that would have been broadcast over the church's radio station into the Bismarck community. When he said, I mean, there's a point at which, no, that's what he believes. That's representative. That's not him being, just trying to be provocative or edgy or whatever. Maybe that's just what he believes. And if that's what he believes, then maybe he is a racist. Maybe he is a bigot. And if you're listening and you're condoning it, maybe you are too.
Yeah, and I also think, like, I struggle, like, with the evangelical Christian embracing of Donald Trump. I think most people can agree that Donald Trump has not lived the most ethical life. When you start talking about paying off porn stars and cheating on your spouses and some of the things that he said. And so just the idea that evangelical Christians, who are very, like, often judge other people's lifestyles very much, but they've embraced him in a way that it's like, it makes me worried that there is this thought that somehow from a certain group of evangelicals that Trump was put here by God, or, something like that, because they are just ignoring all of his unethical behaviors. And it's just like, he can't do any wrong. And it's cult-like. It's gone past the normal sort of level of political support.
Well, I'm not a sociologist or anything like this, but in my mind, as somebody who's read a lot, has been very interested in religion, the positive aspects of religion, and then cults, which obviously pejorative, and the more negative aspects of that. I draw just like one of the defining characteristics of separating something that's just a movement versus a cult is ideas. Like if you're organized around a set of ideas, like Christianity is organized around the 10 Commandments and commitment to, honoring your father and mother and turning the other cheek, and those are ideas, right? And so Christianity organizes itself around, and it's its various components, organizes itself around a set of ideas. I think the difference between that is when you start organizing yourself around a person, and not like a deity, not like Jesus or God or Allah or Muhammad or what have you, but like a living person, a politician. That to me is a cult, right? Like if you're organized around a set of ideas, like the Republican Party organized around a platform, a set of ideas. We believe in limited government and the sanctity of life and all those things, and that's fine. But when you start setting aside your principles to just follow a person, now you've become a cult. And I look at the evangelicals, and it's like, that's what you're doing right now. Like you're setting aside your convictions, your deeply held faith and convictions about how a man, how a woman, how a person ought to conduct themselves and live their lives. You're setting all of that aside to embrace Donald Trump. How is that not a cult?
Yeah, how is that not a cult? And how are you a true Christian or true evangelical if you're just going to ignore everything that you've preached in the past to follow this guy no matter what he does. And you know, a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump says, you're not going to find in the Bible.
Well, I mean, also, like, you ask me, like, evangelicals ask a lot when they file lawsuits or they make public policy, and they're saying, you know, I'm doing this because it's a part of my, you know, sincerely held conviction. So, like, you know, I don't want to have to pay for an insurance policy that covers abortion, right? Because of my sincere. I'm willing to accept that as an argument. I mean, agree with it or disagree with it. I understand that. Those are your convictions, and it's coming from that place. It becomes harder for me to accept I'm making this argument from a place of conviction when your convictions clearly don't matter that much to you, when you're willing to set them aside for somebody like Donald Trump or somebody like Charlie Kirk or some of these other people.
Well, I also get frustrated with the idea of somebody, like in the scenario you laid out, that, you know, they've got a held belief that won't allow them to do something. But then often these same people won't accept other people who have different firmly held beliefs in order to believe something or not believe something. And it goes to the Christian nationalism that you had at the beginning of your article, right? I mean, this isn't just about religious freedom or whatever. It's just one religion.
Well, it gets to Representative Brandon Pritchard saying something like, we should put Christ as king in state law. Now, I understand that may be something that you believe. You may believe that Christ is king, but we live in a plural society, one that guarantees religious liberty. And your liberty to believe that Christ is king and to show up in a church on Sunday where you preach that Christ is king.
Go for it.
And you live your life like that, your ability to do all that is guaranteed by the same rights that guarantee a Muslim to show up to a mosque and to worship Allah and to talk to one another about the teaching of Muhammad, or a Jewish person, or a Buddhist person, or frankly an atheist like me to just not engage in any of it.
Right.
You know, but that speaks to, I mean, the problem, it's like, well, I think we should build a 10 Commandments monument in front of City Hall, but I also don't think that we should put an Islamic monument there.
That's exactly right. So this idea of a state religion, and the problem is I don't think there's not enough people who are thinking about this and what this looks like if we become a Muslim majority country, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But do we really want one religion, one political party, one movement to have absolute rights to do whatever they want?
No, that's un-American. That's un-American.
Damn the minority voice.
Yeah.
It's not America.
Un-American. The American system of government was built around protecting the rights of, I'm going to use the word minorities, but I'm not talking about skin color minorities or anything
Less than 50%.
The First Amendment exists to protect unpopular speech. Popular speech doesn't need protections of the First Amendment, right? The Fourth Amendment right to search and seizure is intended to protect you, the individual, and your property from the government just kicking the door in and coming and looking through your underwear drawer whenever they want to, right? I mean, these are meant to protect unpopular people, right? I mean, that to me is the American system. So, you know, this idea where, well, we're a Christian country, and I just, in a lot of ways, it's un-American. And I'm not using that term, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm just trying to like lambast all Christians, because I don't believe that. But a lot of what's being promoted, it's extremism.
Well, and Rob, let's be clear. Most Christians don't believe this stuff.
Right.
Most Christians
just
don't.
As most Muslims didn't like the 9/11 attacks either, right? I mean,
most Christians are offended by this idea of this blurring between church and state. There is and I think that most churches in North Dakota would tell you that they're nervous about the political activity of some of these churches and how it will affect their ability to their tax status moving forward.
Right.
Again, I can't figure out for the life of me, with the activities that were laid out in your article, how New Song Church can be a tax-exempt organization. They're clearly a political organization at this point that dabbles in religion.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know this. But yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. I mean, I don't know. Are we reviewing these things? You know, because I have to pay my taxes.
Right.
why shouldn't you? I mean, if you're going to have a tax shelter, if you're going to be sheltered from taxes,
follow the rules.
Then you
that
should
means
follow
you can't preach
the
from
rules.
the pulpit about politics.
yeah. And you can't endorse candidates and do some of the other things that you're doing. I mean, the pastor of the church, again, was literally in a campaign ad for Kevin Kramer.
And identified as a pastor
Identified
at
as
New Song
a
Church.
pastor at New Song Church. Yeah. So I that really bothers me. And it bothers me as an American because, I mean, not just because they're promoting things that I don't agree with, that I don't think are good for our country, but it's another one of our society's institutions that are being undermined in not a good way. And it really scares me. So, anything else we need to talk about heading into the weekend?
I think that covers it, since we already covered Ohtani.
We covered Ohtani offline, though. You want to talk about it some online?
I think Kelly was still online when he brought up Ohtani.
No, I'm pretty sure I hit stop. For those of we may have we'll call him Pete Rose of the West.
Alleged
Pete Rose of the West. That's going to be.
I think we can save Ohtani for opening day week.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can do that. Tomorrow is 5 days. Well, you guys have already had your opening day, which that was.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little sleepy these days because I've been up at 4:45 watching Korean
on the Korean time zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever time zone that is.
But I will tell you, all this stuff with Ohtani sort of ruined the second game a little bit.
I can imagine. I can imagine that, and Yamamoto is a bust, right? Career over. Nobody pitched well in Korea. I mean,
yeah. Well, the first game nobody could score. The second game they couldn't get any outs out. But in his whole career in Japan, there's only like once or twice he didn't get through 5 innings. And then his first game here, he got through 8 innings. So hopefully he figures it out.
He will. I think Yamamoto's going to be fine. But now our political audience is dwindling away. That's why we leave the baseball talk for the end. We'll put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back. I'm going to try to get Tammy Miller on next week. We had Kelly on today. We'll have Tammy on hopefully next week. I'm going to check in and see if they'll come on. So working on that. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.